Awesome. Chad, well, hey, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
Yeah. How you been holding up with everything that's going on?
It's fairly normal, to be honest.
Good.
I work from home anyways, so.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah. We haven't had a physical gym facility for almost 3 years.
No kidding.
Yeah. So the gym setup's in my garage. The only real change for me has been no jujitsu because, that's the opposite of social distancing.
Yeah. It's a little intimate.
2 weeks, we've been able to open back up and kind of get back to things there. But that wasn't really a big deal to me because in February, in back-to-back weeks, I dislocated and ruptured a tendon in this pinky.
Yeah.
And then the next week I ruptured a tendon in this thumb that had to have surgery and had a pin in it. So I wouldn't have really been training anyways.
Yeah. A little mandatory step away. Yeah. So wait, how did you injure him? Was that from jiu-jitsu?
Yeah. Yeah. Just, this one was like had the grip on the pants and the guy kicked his leg to break the grip and just kicked right into it. And then, this was, as I reached for the grip, basically like my thumb hit and just drove the tip down real hard and just detached the tendon from right at the top.
That's brutal. I did the pinky in college, so I know what you're going through there. I don't know if you're a little smarter than I was and got it fixed, but I just went on drinking that night and living my life.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that they didn't want to do surgery on both of my hands. But yeah, they declined to do surgery on the pinky, so it's just stuck like that. Maybe I just do that on air here and just smash it straight again.
That'd be good radio, actually. Hey, so actually, I mean, I think, a lot of people probably know you from your powerlifting background, but like, how are you enjoying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
It's been a lot of fun. I first got exposed to Jiu-Jitsu. They're really some of our first clientele at Juggernaut. One of the first cold call kind of things I did connected me with a gentleman by the name of Fabio Vilela, Gigantinho, and I walked into his jiu-jitsu gym really not knowing anything about jiu-jitsu besides this is part of MMA and Hoist Gracie and like wrestling kind of, and walk in there and it's a 6'7", 250-pound Brazilian guy. And so I told him about what we did and how I think I could help him. And, said, I'll train you. If you like it, tell your students, tell your friends. And that turned into at one point having maybe 15 black belts, multiple time world champions.
Really?
Yeah. So all training with me, guiding their strength and conditioning. They'd all roll together and then come and lift 2-3 times a week. And they were always, like, oh, Shed, come on, man, you got to train. You're going to smash everybody. Hey, the Juggernaut now, let's go. This was back 2009, 10, 11, 12. And at the time I was, very focused on powerlifting, on strongman. Didn't want to risk, breaking my fingers or something like that. Or, shoulders, elbows, wrists, whatever. So I sort of declined that. And then, end of 2016, I did what, is the last powerlifting meet I've done. I won't say for sure if it's the last one I'll ever do, but probably. So for most of 2017, just was focused on work, not really training much. And then as we moved out of that gym facility we were in, figured, this is just kind of a clean break time for me to take on a new challenge. Yeah. So, let's call those guys up. I hadn't seen any of them in a couple of years. And then, went from there, and it's been a ton of fun. It's just a whole new challenge. It's being strong helps, but it's certainly not the be all end all, as the technique is just endless and it's getting me moving in ways that I hadn't moved in several years, and, a big challenge on cardio and all that, and just a really cool community. I mean, I've trained jiu-jitsu several places across the U.S. now, Ireland, Australia, Canada. So, you can pretty much any city you're in now, I think you can find a place to roll and a community of people who are into that.
Man, so that's the one thing that I've wanted to get into that I haven't. And for some of the reasons you mentioned, right? Like, one, I am a little scared of the injury aspect of it, particularly the shoulders. I've had some shoulder injuries in the past, so I'm like, I don't know how well that's going to translate. But I don't know if you're into watching some of this old school UFC fights, but like ESPN has like released basically the whole catalog. And
I've got Fight Pass, so I've watched all UFC 1 on from there.
I just went through and watched UFC 1, 2, and 3. I think like last week.
Yeah.
And I mean, that might have been some of the best stuff they've ever done. Like watching Royce Gracie go through, and just like how distinct at that time all the styles were.
For sure. It was, I think it was a lot more like the movie Bloodsport in that, this sort of, and that's really how the UFC started. Was the guy's name is escaping me, but who he contacted Rorion Gracie basically with this idea of like, I was in this argument at a bar with my buddies, who would win in the fight, Mike Tyson or Bruce Lee kind of deal, not that specific one, but that argument is so sort of foundational, I think, and fascinating to people, like who would win in a fight, a bear or a gorilla.
Oh yeah.
So then they found the answer out.
Oh, it's so yeah. If anyone's listening and hasn't seen that, go back and watch it, because it is. I mean, Royce Gracie must have been, I don't know, 180 pounds. Maybe I'm even being generous at that time. And like some of the dudes that he's rolling in there was a legit sumo wrestler who was one of the contestants in the tournament. I mean, it was just like every walk of life and fighting style you could imagine.
If you're into that,
pretty quickly,
you should check out. They kind of cover it in that 30 for 30, the Chuck versus Tito 30 for 30, but there's a 30 for 30 podcast called No Holds Barred, The Birth of the UFC, I think is what it's called. And
awesome.
Yeah, check. And it's just one episode, but 45 minutes is very interesting.
Yeah, I'll check that out. That was another good documentary, the Chuck and Tito one.
Yeah.
I didn't have all the background on the relationship. I guess I was just too young to appreciate it. And my parents were trying to do the right thing and not let me watch UFC at that time when I was so impressed.
I remember my brother. I have two much older brothers. So UFC 1, I think, was in '93. So that would have been my oldest brother's senior year of high school, and I was 7. And he had seen that, or maybe his freshman year of college saw it or something, and tell me about it. And then I'd see those videos at Blockbuster. And
I was going to say that you used to have to get like the VHS.
Yeah.
That was the only way you could get your hands on it.
Yeah. And like asking my parents, can I rent these? Can I watch these? No. And then like having sleepovers at my friends' houses and asking their parents, can we rent these?
You always had that one friend with the cool dad who there was a shot. If you went to Blockbuster, you could pull something like that off.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So, okay. So you've essentially retired, so to speak, quote unquote, from the sport of powerlifting. But what's amazing, you already mentioned it, is, while you have such a strong powerlifting background, you've worked with athletes from kind of all arenas of sport.
I was a sport performance coach before I did powerlifting myself. I was a sport performance coach after I did powerlifting. We started as a sport performance gym in Orange County in September 2009. You couldn't have been a powerlifting gym in Southern California in 2009, at least not one that actually wanted to pay your rent.
Yeah.
So, because CrossFit was not booming yet. It had not expanded the powerlifting and weightlifting marketplaces yet. So, I trained football players and jiu-jitsu athletes and volleyball and soccer and water polo and swimmers and all kinds of stuff. And even once I started doing powerlifting in summer 2010, I finished my track career, graduated from college in 2009, competed 1 year as a post-collegiate in the shot put through the 2010 outdoor season. And then July 2010 started training for my first powerlifting meet. But even once I started competing in powerlifting and became established there very quickly, we did not become a powerlifting gym. I did powerlifting, and I was the only person at the gym who did powerlifting. We did sport performance coaching, and then we moved out of that first facility in 2012. The lease was up, and at that point, I'd written the first Juggernaut Method book, and I continued coaching, doing like off-season training for football players after that, but put most of my attention towards creating content and traveling to teach powerlifting seminars. And we do some sport performance seminars as well. The first seminar I ever did by myself was a sport performance seminar, 2 days in Boston. I lectured for 7 hours the first day and then coached for 7 hours on, running technique and med ball throws and all that kind of stuff the next day.
Awesome.
In hindsight, I would have probably mixed those days together a little bit more rather than 7 hours of lecturing. But so I just really began to grow in the powerlifting space since then. And it was sort of, turned out to be good because football strength coaches, track strength coaches, where, my main background is people who work with baseball players or jiu-jitsu or whatever, that they're all interested in how to help their athletes become stronger. So powerlifting is not only applicable to powerlifting, but the ideas of it and technique and stuff is applicable across the board. So that's allowed me to still work in the sport performance area. I did combine prep for the NFL this year. I had the number 1 overall draft pick in Big Dick Joe Burrow.
There we go.
Do some consulting for different NFL teams and stuff. So I get to do enough of the sport performance stuff to keep me engaged there. But the main effort for me is powerlifting coaching, and we have our weightlifting coach Max Ada, as well as the rest of our team of coaches for Juggernaut.
So let me ask you a question. It's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show. So I've been a huge fan of your platform for a very long time now, just in terms of like the content that you put out. It's really diverse in that it covers, you get really granular on something as specific as like how to bench press. I even went back and watched one of your series last night, but then it covers everything. And I've even tapped into some of your articles for like combine training, and because it overlaps with some of the goals that I've had in the recent events that I was competing in. But what I wanted to ask you is, so how are you working with these guys across the country now if you don't have a physical gym? Is everything like remote consulting coaching based, or are you traveling out to see these guys and work with them hands-on? Like, clearly you're still working with people at a very high level across multiple sports. Like, kind of how are you getting that done?
Yeah, it's pretty much all remote. For my own coaching, I've at this point just have like a handful of powerlifters that I personally coach. The only one really consistently in person is my girlfriend, Marissa Inda, 2017 IPF world champion, 5-time straight American, U.S. national champion. And then, so I have a small handful of powerlifters, but most of that is just, send them the sets and reps and get their feedback and watch some videos. On the sport performance side of things, I have 2 U.S. bobsled athletes that I do their physical preparation stuff, and the number 1 U.S. hammer thrower, and then a Olympian for Greece in the shot put, but he's lives in America but competes for Greece.
Got it.
It's just all remote. We just communicate and write the program and tweak it as they give me feedback, and watch some videos here and there. So not too complicated in that sense, but in a broader coaching sense, we have our Juggernaut AI coaching systems for powerlifting, powerbuilding, and weightlifting. And
I definitely wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah. So once we, that was pretty much designed out of the effort of there was going to be a bottleneck of how many people, I can coach, or any coach can deliver quality programming to. So I was like, well, how can we bring my coaching logic to a broader audience through, taking away the time constraint of me actually doing it and the cost constraint of, what one-on-one coaching would cost people to do. So we developed the powerlifting on my side of things, which at this point really makes better programs than I could, to be honest, because it just can track so much more data. And powerlifting is kind of it's a sport for strong nerds because it is such a data-driven sport. It's like a big it's a big math problem, whether that's balancing volume and intensity. And then as you bring in, more technology, if it's something like velocity based training, or just, tracking different recovery metrics, there's, really systematic ways to adjust the training in the long term.
Yeah. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
One of the things I even had written down that I wanted to ask you about today, because just knowing that you work with a lot of guys on combine prep and then powerlifting, everyone's peaking for a meet. I'm so interested to understand like your approach to peaking your athletes, like to perform at their best at a specific competition at a certain day and time. But you mentioned that there's like some recovery metrics and things that you're looking at to kind of help guide like the way in which you're programming for your athletes. Can you talk a little bit about, what sort of metrics you're monitoring, and then I guess how you're using those to, create or alter the programs for your athletes?
Yeah. So we create a what we call a readiness rating, and that is based off of the athlete reporting how much sleep they got, the quality of that sleep, just their sort of general mood and motivation to train, and then rating soreness of different body parts. It creates a score of 0 to 5 for them. 5 meaning I feel great, I'm really ready to go, and so we know the baseline of what the training would be if they feel average. So if they feel great, it can become a little bit more volume or a little bit more intensity depending on what phase they're in. If they feel run down, it's going to reduce the difficulty of that day's training, and it's tracking those readiness ratings day after day after day. So it's looking at like the cumulative, how does, and then they also rate how hard the session was at the end of it. So it's looking at the combination of those numbers to affect the next day, along with the next day's readiness questionnaire, and then looking at the average of that entire week to adjust the next week, the average of that month of training to adjust the next month, the averages of that entire block of training or like the entire program to adjust the next program.
And is that all? Yeah. Is that all like qualitative or like survey based? Or are you using any like wearable trackers?
So we don't use any wearables right now. I would see at some point, using something like HRV or sleep monitoring. A combination of those. From like just heart rate tracking for powerlifting doesn't really play much of a role. HRV, while it's definitely got usefulness in kind of broader group sense to see trends, typically when someone has a reduction in their HRV score, or, they go into the red or whatever, it's kind of a lagging indicator of their readiness, but it can be useful for sure. Taking some of the subjectivity of things of like how well did you sleep out of it, and a device being able to say, well, this is how well they slept. That's definitely got value. And then so eventually we'd like to incorporate that, as well as more velocity based information, rather than someone rating, well, this set felt like a 8 RPE, 8 out of 10 or whatever. We can just create an individualized velocity profile for that person, even though all those bar tracking apps and stuff is not the best, most consistent information, and even really expensive things like a Tendo unit or a Gym Aware, because they don't account for the bar moving forwards and backwards, only up and down. That can throw the measurements it gives off. But as things improve there and become less cost prohibitive, that's definitely something we'd like to incorporate as well, to really just make it as totally objective as possible.
Yeah. And the, for people listening, so like the idea behind the velocity measures, right? That's literally trying to understand. So like, again, I mentioned bench press. If you're doing bench press, right, it's trying to understand the velocity at which that person's actually moving the bar, right? And is the idea there that the velocity is a better indicator of someone's physical readiness? Because when they are at like I guess, I don't know if this is the right term, but like a peak performance state, like they're going to move the bar faster?
Yeah. So in the powerlifting sense, where all that really matters is it goes up. There's the
Pretty critical.
the speed quality really necessary for powerlifting. You could be as slow as you want. It still counts. But
right.
We've got some velocity-based data, averages of bigger populations to say, if it's going this fast, it's either this strength quality is being developed, speed strength, explosive strength, strength speed, all that sort of stuff. Or, if the velocity goes below this, typically people miss. If the velocity is declining at a given rate from rep to rep to rep, then you can be predictive of how many more reps could they have done, would they have missed the next rep, and those would form like, the understanding for the first program. But then as we begin to develop your own, Ken's velocity profile, we might see that, you can do reps when they're really fast, and as soon as the bar slows down very much, you miss, or that you're really good at grinding through these slow reps. So, if you've seen a lifter like Dan Green is phenomenal at doing like really slow reps, like grinding through reps, or, I'll see him do 2 reps and be like, oh, that was pretty strong for 2. And then he goes on to do 3 more reps, where I'm very much on the other side of things, like where I might do 2 fast reps, and then the third one I miss. So individualizing that stuff further would be that much more, significant to be able for the system to be able to tell people like, okay, you can go up in weight, go down in weight, cut, that exercise is done for the day, whatever it may be.
Yeah. And, something that I've been trying to pay a lot more attention to, and, I'm ashamed to admit that I didn't even know that this was a thing, but like just the central nervous system back when I was playing college football, right? Like, I don't think there was at any point during my 5 years where I even considered how my central nervous system was doing at any given point. Is this something that can also kind of help infer, like, when you're starting to get your CNS is starting to get fatigued? And I guess, it would, you kind of said this already, like once you have a baseline, maybe is it like an early warning signal that like, hey, this guy's gassed, his speeds aren't what they normally are, velocity isn't what it normally is?
Yeah, definitely. The velocity can be a big indicator of neural fatigue. Neural fatigue is very significant in the training because it takes a lot longer to decay that than just like muscular fatigue. And it's brought on by the much higher level efforts. So when you go and lift as heavy as you can, sprint as fast as you can, jump as high as you can, especially the stuff that's really high velocity, like sprinting and jumping, you don't have to do a ton of it to generate a lot of neural fatigue. And you might not even feel tired in the sense that, I was sweating my ass off and huffing and puffing, or sore from it. But, Usain Bolt's not going out back-to-back days and running, 700 meters because of such a huge neural effort he will have that systemic neural fatigue.
So how do you help track that for your athletes? And I guess, how do you identify like when it's time to back off? And I guess maybe even more broadly, maybe you can talk about the approach that you have your athletes, and I'm sure it depends upon sport, but the approach you take with like deloading.
Yeah. So, as far as fatigue management goes, tracking all these different metrics like sleep and just, mood, motivation to train, soreness, those can be, that should be the first place to start when being able to do that stuff. But training should be, largely predictable, assuming that the athlete's lifestyle is relatively consistent. You get someone who 1 week they sleep great, the next week they sleep bad. They're all over the place with their diet, high stress lifestyle, whether that's, a manual labor job or a very stressful home life for however many different reasons, school, all this kind of stuff. That complicates the issue, certainly, of being able to manage their fatigue and predict things well. But, assuming that kind of stuff is typically normalized, we're looking at establishing these volume landmarks. What we look at are really four different numbers, but the two main ones that we focus on, we call MEV, minimum effective volume, and MRV, maximum recoverable volume. And that MEV is the least amount of training you can do to make a very small improvement. And maximum recoverable volume, the most training you can do in a microcycle, like in a week, be recovered, so like back to baseline by the following week. So the way that the Juggernaut AI does this is those volume landmarks are individualized, certainly, but by some easy to understand individual differences, we can make a lot of good estimations about what's happening with them. So gender, height, weight, strength, experience, lifestyle factors are things that people can tell us about, and we know, all right, well, females can tolerate more volume than males, and short people more volume than tall people, and light people more volume than heavy people. And as lifters go from beginner to intermediate to advanced to very advanced, they can kind of tolerate more, and then it's going to start to taper off. And as they get stronger and stronger, every lift they do is more fatiguing because of the neural fatigue part of things. The stronger you get, the less volume. And I'm referring to these volume landmarks as number of sets within a given range. So like for us, our hypertrophy work is all between 55 to 70%, sets of 6 to 12. So I'll refer to like MEV and MRV numbers as, maybe MEV of 10, MRV of 20 in hypertrophy. But I'm only looking at sets that are within that range. So tonnage is really the other number that would be considered, but tonnage is more just for the individual, where the number of sets I can speak about in a group sense. So those individual factors are going to help us inform, all right, that Ken can probably benefit from this much volume and tolerate this much volume. And then from there, your readiness ratings will help refine those numbers as you go. So while we might go into it just looking at your gender, height, weight, strength, experience, the technique you have in the lifts, like sumo deadlift can tolerate more technique than conventional, or more volume than conventional deadlifts, what your lifestyle factors are like. So how's your sleep? How's your diet? How's your away from training stress? What type of training you've done before, which we call historical workload, how you sort of assess, our best effort for you to assess your genetics, we call historical recovery ability. When you tell us that stuff about you, we might be able to say, all right, Ken probably needs about 10 sets of squats per week to improve, and he can probably tolerate up to 16 sets per week, while someone else might be from 6 to 20, and more advanced, bigger, stronger lifters will have a more narrow band. They might be from 10 to 13. So as that changes, we can then be predictive about when you would need that deload. So is it going to, if you have a really big spread between numbers, more beginners, lighter weight lifters, it may be appropriate for them to train for 4 or 5 weeks hard and then a deload. While bigger, stronger, more experienced lifters, they're probably 2 or 3 weeks hard training and then a deload. But deloads are definitely a valuable part of training because good training is hard. The most effective training is going to be very hard. It's going to be pushing towards that maximum recoverable volume, and sort of the space between the MEV and MRV, we call MAV, maximum adaptive volume, sort of where your best gains are going to happen. But for people who are like, I don't need a deload. Well, you're not training as hard as you could be. You're not making progress as fast as you could be. So yeah, deload's a really valuable part of training, and being able to predict when you need it isn't that complicated to do, because people who are like, well, I'll just deload when I need a deload. That if you're just training to train, that can work. Okay. Yeah. But typically, even in that scenario, that person will then be deloading after they need a deload. But if you're getting ready for a meet, you can't just train and be like, okay, now I need a deload, because maybe that made your hypertrophy cycle go too long, or now you don't have the right timing going into a meet to be able to peak properly and put your best performance forward there when it actually counts.
Yeah.
Really be able to plan that out, from the start of the training cycle.
Yeah. And, man, you said a lot of things in there that are really interesting. So thinking first about this AI platform that you've built, what is kind of the initial data that went into creating that AI? Was this all things that you'd validated over over a decade worth of just coaching your individual athletes? And then is the AI continuing to kind of learn as you kind of like get more, robust scale from all the folks adopting it and feeding data into the system?
Yeah. So it was known as an expert system artificial intelligence, which is basically applying getting the computer to make decisions in the same way that an expert me would. So it's not a machine learning system. And I can go into sort of the ethics of machine learning in applications to humans, because people actually have to do these programs that it writes in the mobile app we're working on. There will be more some aspects of machine learning involved in that, but really the updates as we've gone have been, just feedback from the clients, seeing who is most successful with the programs, what are their volume landmarks being set at, what are their, how are they typically rating or what is their readiness ratings typically? What trends do we see in those readiness ratings? Adjusting proportions of how much hypertrophy they do to how much strength they do to how long their peaking phases are, different styles of periodization that get implemented. Because the initial creation of it, that was based on my coaching logic. These are the decisions I'd make for this type of lifter, this type of lifter, this type of lifter. Yeah. Rules for, well, if you have a lightweight lifter, we do this. And if they are male, this happens, lightweight, so on and so forth. And there's just tens of thousands of those. I mean, the initial program that is created through the AI system now has about 9 quadrillion permutations to it. And that system, which is, not individualized through these 9 quadrillion ways, then adjusts within the session to session, week to week, month to month, program to program for the athlete. So once they've gone through, 10, 12 weeks of training, like it's really getting dialed very, very much for them. And so I see people, and I've contributed to this myself, they're selling a program that's in an ebook, or they're selling a template or whatever, and people are using that. And it's like, that might be a fine program, and it might work. If we look at like everyone in a bell curve, it's going to work pretty well for some of that bell curve, but that is a program that has fixed sets and reps. It is static, where what we have can work, for the entire bell curve, because it's adjusting the program for any type of lifter in there. We've had, I think the biggest total we've had is someone made a 2150 total in the 275 class. There's been 5 guys about 800 pounds, 5 guys, and I think 3 of them, the same people, deadlift over 800 pounds using it, maybe 3 or 4 500-pound benchers. People who've gone from class 1 totals to international elite totals, as well as beginner lifters using it. And the beginner lifter part of it is like, it's sort of easy. Lots of things work when you're a beginner. But, I try and get people away from the idea that there's beginner programs, intermediate programs, advanced programs, that there's programs that are better for heavyweights or lightweights, or or men or women or whatever, because their programming, the distinction between program and programming is the principles, the scientific principles of strength training that we use to guide our programming decisions. They exist in all effective programs. The way that they get applied, what overload entails for lifter A versus lifter B changes, but specificity is always important. The principle of overload has to always exist. Your program has to have some level of fatigue management in it. All of those things are always important. No one will have a good program that does not apply the principle of overload to it. It would be so individualized to that person. But if it doesn't overload, it's a training that's not sufficiently stimulating, like enough volume or enough intensity to drive muscle growth or strength increases, and it doesn't get harder over time, it won't work. No matter what. No matter if it's the exercises just for this person's unique weak points or whatever. It has to have these principles, and those individual differences, gender, size, strength, experience, all that stuff, that dictates how the principles are applied and the magnitude of them. And that's why what we've created can work for everyone, from beginner to advanced, from 4'10", 100-pound girl who's been lifting for 6 months to 6'2", 350-pound dude who's been lifting for 20 years. Because it's adjusting what it gives them.
Yeah. It's so cool. And I have to imagine it's got to be pretty exciting. And I mean, you're now, I mean, literally, I didn't realize you'd gotten rid of the physical gym, but I mean, just like the scalability of, what this kind of creates, you know what I mean? And the scalability of being able to work with a ton of different people. And to your point, it's awesome to hear that, amateurs are getting a ton from it, as well as like elite level powerlifters who are, like starting to push the boundaries of being some of the best in the world. And that's pretty cool. I'm just thinking now for the listeners, right? Because I run into so many people, and I work for a tech company, and I'll bump into people in the cafeteria. And one of the guys that I worked with actually started using your AI program, interestingly enough, and he had a deadlift goal. And people might not suspect that from people working within tech, but you know what I mean? There's powerlifters everywhere, people who love to get strong.
Max did a seminar at Facebook headquarters for like the Facebook staff's powerlifting club.
See, awesome. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, they're everywhere. So the scalability of it is so cool, but just you were kind of harping on like, hey, your program has to at least have this basic principle of like overloading. Can you just kind of describe like what that entails for people? Because I know there's a lot of people who go to the gym, they think they're putting in work, and they get frustrated maybe by the lack of results. It might be something as simple as what you were mentioning is like a necessary ingredient that they need to be taken into consideration.
Yeah. So 7 principles. I try and keep my grotesque pinky out of it.
Oh, thank you.
So we have a whole book about this, Scientific Principles of Strength Training, co-authored by myself, Mike Israetel, and James Hoffman. Specificity. So obviously the training has to support the underlying systems of success for whatever. In powerlifting, that's muscle size, neural force production, technique. For weightlifting, it changes. For sport performance, it changes. But all successful programs are going to be guided by specificity, which creates a framework in which all the other decisions are made. Principle number 2, the principle of overload, that this will all be in the context of powerlifting. Now that the training has enough volume to support muscle growth, that it is heavy enough to support, improve force production and those neural qualities, that you're, getting enough training to develop technical prowess. Number 3 is fatigue management. And the other part of overload is that the training must become harder over time. So as that training becomes harder and harder and harder, we can't just go on and do that in perpetuity. You can't train harder tomorrow than you did today and harder the next day after that. Fatigue is gonna accumulate, and that's neural fatigue. It's joint and tendon integrity. It's muscle soreness. There's a lot of different factors sort of all working together. So it's much more nuanced than just fatigue. But you have to manage that somehow. So whether that's through taking deloads, through, undulating and modulating volume and intensities, through not just trying to train harder and harder and harder every single day. You have to have some component of fatigue management in there. The next one is called stimulus recovery adaptation, principle of SRA. That's really goes a long way to inform about frequency of training. So how often should you be training hard? Because as you introduce a stimulus, and is the video of this go up, or is it only the audio?
No, it's just the audio.
All right. Well, I'm drawing a graph with my finger.
As he points at me and draws a graph, I'll annotate for everyone listening.
Yeah, it's an air graph. And luckily for the listeners, we've got a lot of videos about these topics, as well as books, probably more than they'll ever care to watch or read. But if someone's really into it,
I'll make sure to link to it.
The stimulus is introduced, fatigue is generated from that, and then over a process of over a period of time, the athlete's going to recover, adapt to that stimulus to have like some level of super compensation, so improved abilities to what they had before. You have to introduce the training again. So that's just sort of the process of training, and the timing of those sessions is really significant because technique has its own SRA curve, neural force production has its own SRA curve, hypertrophy has its own SRA curve, and they're not all the same. So finding that sort of sweet spot between being recovered enough to do the next session, but not waiting so long that your technique starts to get rusty or your gains start to kind of fall off is important. The next principle, number 5, is variation. Principle of variation and specificity are kind of like two sides of the same coin. Another concept we refer to in this, and got a YouTube video just about this, called directed adaptation versus adaptive resistance. Basically, if you want something to improve, you need to train that quality. But the longer you train it with the same modalities, the slower the results will come. So that's where variation needs to be introduced, whether that's changing set rep schemes, changing exercises, changing frequency of training to give your body some novel stimulus to force it to continually adapt. There are lots of people who they give too much attention to variation and not enough to specificity, too much attention to adaptive resistance, so avoiding that slowing down of gains rather than directed adaptation of, I want to improve at this thing, so I need to do it, which is a mistake, but they both play a role. It's also important to strategically use variation to avoid injury. Principle number 6 is phase potentiation, so that we're creating a strategic sequence of training to where each aspect of training builds upon the previous one. So in powerlifting, it's fairly straightforward. We train for hypertrophy to make a muscle bigger. Then on top of that, we stack strength to increase the force production ability of those bigger muscles. And then on top of that, we stack peaking, where we're going to develop the technical prowess of the competitive lifts of those bigger, more force-producing muscles we've created in the subsequent phases. That's also going to help us manage fatigue, decaying fatigue, while keeping fitness high. So on the day that matters, the powerlifting meet, you can be your strongest and express all the hard work you've done. And finally, principle number 7, individual differences, is what dictates, is what makes those sort of micro adjustments within. Well, what is, for overload, what is sufficient volume? What is sufficient intensity for that person based on gender, size, strength, experience, all of those different factors, and what is appropriate for, I always mess up inter and intra individual, but
I won't know the difference.
Yeah. So like for you, let's say, how must your training change, a year from now compared to today, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as you become bigger, stronger, more experienced, probably with some different kind of, injuries of varying degrees, all that sort of stuff, or as you just go through different phases of your life, for a student, let's say, how should their training change depending on when they're in summer break versus when they're in finals.
Yeah.
A big life change. So those, I think, inter-individual differences. I'm really bad at it.
Yeah, we'll edit it. We'll ask someone smarter than me, and we'll edit it back in.
But for that individual, there's going to be changes as well as individual to individual.
Yeah. Damn, so I'm glad I asked that question.
Yeah, so to give, sort of a short answer to what is a big question of like, someone's going to 24-hour fitness and they're not seeing the progress that they want to see. It's because, they're not satisfying probably things higher up in that hierarchy. So they need to change something. They're either doing too much or not enough. That's sort of the simplest one. I'd say more often than not, people aren't training hard enough, or they're not managing fatigue properly. So, they go and they do bench and arms 5 days a week.
Right.
And so maybe they aren't managing fatigue, or they need to introduce some variation there with, changes in set rep strategies, change the exercise. But yeah, we've got a lot of stuff about that. Scientific Principles of Strength Training is the book. I have a YouTube series, one video for each principle. They're like 15 to 30 minutes each. But questions like, what do they need to change type of thing, or the example I always use is people ask, well, how often should I squat? And they're asking that from a very innocent place, wanting, it's a simple question and they want a simple answer. But I refuse to give a blanket answer of, without the context of that person, to say, 2 times a week is the best or 3 times a week is the best, even though I know that's what they want.
They want,
they want a simple answer. And there are people who will give them that simple answer. Those people are probably not giving them the right answer.
And we're not going to let them on this show, Chad. I want you to know. Okay.
Yeah. I refuse to do that because I feel like it would be a disservice to the people, because all this stuff, people might be listening now and just be like, holy shit, this is all going over my head. As you get into it, it's not too complicated, but I want to give people the understanding to be descriptive rather than prescriptive for this stuff, so they can understand, well, 2 times a week might be right for me now, but a year from now, maybe 3 times a week is right, or 4 times a week, or once, or all these different factors, or what's right for, my training partner might not be right for me. And for them to be able to make those adjustments so they can have, they can reach the goals that they're working so passionately towards.
Yeah. What's interesting too is this is something that I love talking about. I'm super passionate about it, and I've been reading about it for years. And even I find myself, there's so many factors to take into consideration that if you are trying to program for yourself, it's easy to be like, oh man, we're you can get turned around. You know what I mean? So thankfully there's folks like you out there who can help keep it straight for everyone. I asked you about deloading, and I'd be angry at myself if I didn't ask, what does a deload week look like? And I guess you just got done telling me, don't ask a.
No, I can give you a really specific answer to that.
Yes. All right, let's go. Here we go.
Yeah. So typically a deload week, and these numbers are based off of the training that you've been doing.
Right.
Should be a 10 to 20% reduction in intensity and a 20 to 50% reduction in volume. Okay. So let's say last week you did 5 sets of 8 at 300 pounds in the deadlift. Your deload week then might be 3 sets of 8 at 270 pounds, or 5 sets of 6 at 270 pounds. And if you feel really run down, maybe you're more to the 50% reduction in volume. So, you might you were doing 5 sets of 6 or 5 sets of 8, 40 reps, you'd go down to 5 sets of 4, just 20 reps. So a 50% reduction. Or instead of just dropping from 300 to 270, a 10% reduction, maybe you go down to 240, 20% reduction. But, playing with those ranges based on how you feel. It's, to give the bigger answer, part of that thing, would be that there's 3 levels of fatigue.
Okay.
There's training within your MRV, normal training that you're able to recover from. Then there's overreaching, which could be functional, planned, or non-functional, not planned. And there's overtraining, which is this, chronic overreaching. You should be functionally overreaching at the end of a training cycle. So where the last hard day or two of your training cycle, you feel very bad, but not so bad that you can't complete the planned training.
Yeah.
You do it and it's going to be hard. Then at the start of a deload week, you will now feel even worse because you did those last hard training cycles.
Yeah.
And you'll look at this deload workout, which is maybe, 4 sets of 5 at 240 right after you've done, 5 sets of 8 at 300. And you're like, this is a joke. This is going to be so easy. Part of you is like, I don't even want to go in and do it. I feel like shit. This is like a throwaway workout. You're going to go in, you're going to do it. And It's going to feel way harder than you expected it to. What it looked like on paper is going to feel much more challenging because you have a lot of fatigue built up. And you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like, I don't want to lift anymore.
Yeah.
And, that's Monday of the deload week. And Tuesday is probably like that. Wednesday, you start to trend up a little bit. And then, Friday or Saturday, your last workout of the deload, it's still this easy workout. And now you're looking at it like, this is nothing. You go in and just crank the reps out, and you're like, I'm done with this weak shit. Give me back heavy weight. And then you start hard training again, and the process begins anew. So that should sort of be the psychological feel. And so when you get to that start of the deload week and you feel terrible, like that's fine. You should feel terrible. You'll feel better throughout the week. Not doing anything is not the right answer. Doing those light workouts will, one, help you, stay in touch with your technique, because technique could decay throughout that week. It will actually help facilitate recovery, getting the blood flowing through the exact muscles that we're trying to recover. Another kind of little bit of advice for a deload week is deload weeks are not the time for new stuff. It's while it can be this sort of like more loosely structured training, it's not the time to be like, well, I haven't done split squats in 3 months, so I can kind of do whatever during this deload week. Let me throw these split squats in. Because what happens when you do a new exercise?
Oh yeah.
It makes you really sore. It makes you
exactly.
When exercise, because it's
new adaptation, right?
It generates more fatigue. So you want to avoid doing new stuff. The only caveat to that being is if it's going to be an exercise that is coming into your program starting in the next training block.
Okay.
When you come off of the deload, go ahead and introduce it just a little bit,
don't overdo it.
Start to familiarize yourself and create that smooth transition from block to block of training.
And what are you doing for like accessories? Are you cutting back the reps and volume, just the same general principle? Because I know that some folks say like, oh, you can keep the accessory stuff hot, similar to where it was. What's your stance on that?
That just goes with the idea of the range of work. If you feel not too bad, then you just lower the main work and you keep the accessory where it is. You feel really bad, you lower the main work even more and lower the accessory some. But generally, yes, you do not need to treat the accessory work as severely as you do the main work.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, something, we didn't talk about this yet, but, like I have a full-time job, 3 kids, and I used to commute. So when you mentioned like, there's a lot of other factors that can play into like kind of like your stress level and like fatigue, I'm living and breathing that every day, like a lot of folks who listen. So, I have tried to make an effort on deload weeks to say like, just back off. Like, even though you're tired from the lifting, like you got a lot of other shit going on in your life.
For sure.
It's like, give myself a break. But to your point, I end up feeling that way. Like by the end of the week, I'm like starting to feel a little bit fresher. And I'm like,
you want to be like chomping at the bit by the end of the week. Trying to.
Yeah.
And, in regards to recovery stuff, we have a book by Dr. James Hoffman called Recovering from Training that I'd suggest. We have a couple YouTube videos of recovery adaptive strategies in which he outlines different ideas. One sort of main takeaway for people competing in powerlifting or weightlifting is I tend to avoid like passive recovery modalities within the course of normal training. So a passive recovery modality, something like an ice bath or contrast shower.
You avoid those
during the course of regular training. So I reserve that for a deload week or a taper, because the function of an ice bath, let's say, is for reducing inflammation. But inflammation is a very powerful adaptation signal to the body.
Yeah.
So when you your body has all this inflammation, and it doesn't know what squats, benches, and deadlifts are. It just knows stress, stimulus, these stuff like inflammation. So all this inflammation is like, oh my God, Chad he's trying to kill me. We have to get ready. So the next time he tries to kill us with this metal thing on his back, that we're ready.
Right.
But if I remove some of that inflammation sort of artificially through something like an ice bath, now it doesn't know that it needs to get as ready. So it's a very, very small, we're talking fractions of a percent difference. But if people get into the habit of, after every squat workout, I always do ice bath, then you're going to dampen the effectiveness of your training. But during a deload week where decaying fatigue and feeling better, especially like the second half of a deload week, is the primary goal, you don't really have to worry about dampening the adaptations of training. Then you just want to worry about feeling better. So then that can be appropriate. During the course of regular training, focus on the main components of recovery: good sleep, good diet, stress management. Let that be how your recovery is achieved during normal training, and then save the other stuff for deloads or for times of particularly high stress, whether that's like very, very hard training, you're training double days, and your options are take an ice bath and do that afternoon's workout, or skip the ice bath and then you have to reduce the afternoon's workout or skip it altogether. Then the ice bath is better. Or if it's really stressful time for whatever other reason you need that little bit extra, sure, go ahead and do it, but make it a sparing thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's great perspective. And something that I think a lot of people probably weren't aware of. Okay. So here's a question that I have for you, and we've kind of referenced it a little bit. But peaking, what does effective peaking look like? And I guess maybe it's an incorrect assumption. It varies based upon like the sport or the event that you're preparing your athletes for. But someone who's trying to peak for an event, like what are the general principles that they should kind of be thinking about?
Yeah. So certainly what the peak will actually look like in terms of exercise selection and all this sort of stuff is dictated by specificity. So it's going to vary based on, the endeavor they're going for, but the principles of it will stay the same. And that's about becoming more specific. So doing more of the competitive exercise for developing technical prowess as you go, doing it higher and higher, closer to competition intensities, and then managing the fitness fatigue relationship so that on the day of competition, you have the highest fitness possible with the lowest fatigue possible. That's the goal. And what will also hold true for any track and field, powerlifting, weightlifting, whatever, is that effective peaking starts at the beginning of the program. That you can't, you can't have kind of a month of shitty training or 2 months of shitty training and be like, I'm gonna have a great peaking block and then a great meet.
Yeah, I'm gonna knock it out. I'm gonna knock it out that last week.
Yeah, and that's as much as I love Rocky IV, one
of the greatest movies of all time.
The variety of sports movies, they do perpetuate the wrong ideas about the structure of training. They do the most training right before they go, and then they seem to save the world and end the Cold War. But
I don't know. Just put on a little burning heart and get out there in a log cabin.
Yeah. So that time right before competitions, when you're going to be doing the least training, So when I say it starts at the beginning of the training plan, you have to build up your fitness. You have to build up, general work capacity, special work capacity, really fatigue early in the training process, so that when you get to the peaking block, which is inherently lower volume, you have enough fitness built up that you can, begin to reduce volume of training, but not, not start to fall off in the fitness level you have. So with using powerlifting as the example, if all you ever did were sets of 1 in the squat, how would you take away from that to then be able to manage that fitness fatigue relationship, to be able to decay fatigue without losing fitness? You can't, because there's nothing to take away from. I guess you could early be doing 20 sets of 1 and later be doing 3 sets of 1, but that just sounds like a real pain in the ass.
Yeah, it sounds terrible.
So building up volume early in the training plan is going to, help kind of carry your fitness through longer, help you retain it longer as you start to cut out volume without your fitness starting to fall off. So you gotta build that, and a lot of times for peaking or phase potentiation, we use like the analogy of a skyscraper, or you gotta maybe even dig down the foundation and create that broad base to be able to build taller and taller and taller. With all that said, you can have great training the whole way. While a great peaking block can't save a bad training cycle, a bad peaking block can screw up everything.
Can ruin it. Yeah.
By doing too much training, by doing stuff that's not specific enough. I've seen people, very good lifters, people who are really respected academics, be doing sets of 6 in the deadlift 2 weeks out from a meet, and then either not lift well, injure themselves right before the meet because they're doing training that's not appropriate for that time. It's not specific to that phase of training.
How far out do you start thinking about peaking?
So the more experienced you are, the longer peaking block you're going to have. In powerlifting, I squatted 970 pounds. My last squat in training before that, the heaviest squat I did in training before that was 915 pounds.
Okay.
So squatting 915 pounds takes longer to recover from, takes longer to decay that fatigue than squatting 715 or 515 or 315 does. So I was using a 2-week taper. Taper peak. Taper's like the end of the peak. It's the deload into the meet. Sort of semantics. So I was using a 2-week taper, which is about as long as anyone I know of in powerlifting. But looking at all these individual differences, which dictate taper length, the bigger you are, the longer taper you need. I was 365 pounds. The stronger you are, the longer taper you need. I was squatting 950 pounds. The longer you've been training, the longer taper you will need. I've been training for 15 years at that point. So I was the farthest extreme there. But typically most people will fall somewhere between a 3 and 10 day taper. So that's the time from their last peaking, overloading training to the competition. But in terms of how long the entire peaking block would be, on the short end, very small beginner female lifter may have 2 weeks of peaking training and then like a 3 or 4 day taper into the meet. So they might, just start doing heavy singles and doubles. They do that for 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks. And then like their last hard workouts on a Tuesday, and then they would compete on Saturday. So a pretty short time, where for me, I was doing like 5 or 6 weeks of very hard peaking training, high intensity, and then 2 weeks of taper. So the entire process was 8 weeks long. But if that same very small beginner female tried to take an 8-week peaking block and plus taper, they would start to lose a lot of fitness because the weights they're lifting for those low volumes aren't stimulating enough to keep their hypertrophy, to keep their neural strength adaptations, because there's the weights aren't heavy enough. They're not generating enough stimulus from them.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And I think, man, I might mess this up, but I remember watching Eddie Hall talk about like his approach to deadlifting after he did like the 500 kilos.
Mhm.
And I think he was saying that one of the things that he tweaked was like, to your point, he wouldn't deadlift within like 10 days. He wouldn't have two deadlifting sessions within like 10 days of each other
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
was just like
When you're
the
lifting that
demands.
heavy weights, it's
Yeah.
got to be longer between the heavy sessions. Now, I can't speak specifically to what he was doing, and obviously it was extremely effective.
Hmm.
But, as people hear that and sort of the danger or folly of people looking to someone like Eddie Hall or even at my own training or what Marissa does, is they're looking at what that person is doing now rather than what they did to get there. Because the training you do while deadlifting 500 kilos, is much different because
Yeah.
each of those deadlift sessions is generating so much stimulus and so much fatigue. He needs that long to recover,
Right.
nervous system to recover, but he'd also been deadlifting for how many years before that. So him taking 10 days in between might represent a very small fraction of it, and his deadlift technique is so stable.
Yeah.
Where someone else, they're like, well, Eddie Hall only deadlifts every 10 days, and they start to deadlift every 10 days, and so they pull
It's
315.
like, bro, you're 180 pounds.
A week from Wednesday, they go to do 315 again. They're like, oh, my technique just feels kind of off.
Yeah.
One, that person, this is to the principle of SRA, they would have recovered and adapted. And I know they can't see my finger graph, but they'd recover and adapt. And then their fitness would start to decay because they had no new input to it, and it can't hold on for that long. But if they were, to introduce smaller, lighter sessions in between, now they'd be able to keep their technique sharp. They'd be able to, retain some of the qualities from earlier. But if they're loaded the right way and managed properly, it's not going to generate too much fatigue to where they're not recovered again for that heavy deadlift in 10 days. But they'll need to do some other stuff in between it as well. Where someone like Eddie Hall, where the session is just so massive and so fatiguing, and his technique is so stable, he probably could go with only deadlifting every 10 days without any deadlift type of movement in between. But even then, I'd still advise someone like that. And I've coached, 7 guys to over 800 pound deadlifts.
Wow.
They're all doing, they might only deadlift heavy every 3 weeks. They're deadlifting, between those true heavy sessions, they're deadlifting 6 other times in that 3-week span.
Yeah. No, and that's I'm glad you called that out, right? Because I think the big theme here today is like it's so individualized, and it's not only individualized from like person to person. It depends on like time of year, how long you've been doing it, like what you're currently going through. So I think that's helpful for people because it is easy to look at what someone at a very elite level is doing and take that as like, oh, that's the best approach without recognizing like all the amount of factors that contributed along the way to get them at that point and the factors where they're at presently that contribute to them like making that decision. So that's really helpful. So let me ask you this, and we can wrap up on this because I'm just interested. How do you go about like continuing your education and evolving as a coach within the sport? Right. Because I mean, to hear you speak, it's like, I'm going to have to go look a lot of this up afterwards. Like what's your process for kind of like continuing to evolve?
Yeah. So even to kind of give you the journey of that, I guess I started coaching. I've written my own program for the overwhelming majority of my lifting career, which began at 14 years old. I've had a couple coaches along the way, but for the most part, it was me writing my own program. I turned 34 next month, so for 20 years.
Okay.
So that's where I began learning about training. I was 14 in the year 2000, where it was a lot harder to find information about training on the internet. It is now abundant, maybe overly abundant, because there's no barrier to entry for the people who talk about these things. That a slickly worded, photoshopped picture may make someone an expert when they are not truly an expert. Quick note on that. When looking for someone, is it worth listening to their information? Have they done it themselves? Have they coached people to do it? Are they educated?
Yeah.
If the person's not checking 2 of those 3 boxes, I would take pause.
Question it. Yeah.
You know, because it was harder to find information about training, even though I was definitely trying to do that. I began at an early age in high school, finding coaches who I saw were successful, largely in track and field through the shop in college. So when I was at a high school track meet, I would see I knew who the coaches were who were like the best coaches, and I would just ask them about training. I would just badger them with questions, basically as long as they would answer them.
Yeah.
That habit continued into college, asking college track coaches and stuff, learning from not just throwing coaches, my events, but sprint coaches as well, talking to the athletic training staff, talking to their strength and conditioning staff who worked with other sports. Do not, have you watched the Bruce Lee 30 for 30 the other week?
No, but I'm excited too.
It's pretty good. He has a book there's a book that just came out called Bruce Lee, A Life, that I would suggest more. But to the Bruce Lee effect of things, Bruce Lee was sort of, the father of MMA in the sense that he didn't just learn this one style. He tried to learn from, boxers and wrestlers and judokas and all this different stuff, and to take what was useful and to leave what wasn't. So I think that coaches and athletes should do the same thing. That if you're a powerlifter and all you're doing is talking to powerlifting coaches, your knowledge will always be limited. So talk to weightlifting coaches, talk to sport performance coaches, talk to physical therapists. Take what's useful from each of those. I was fortunate to get to be, through being a good shot putter and being at big track meets and all this stuff, get exposure to a lot of high level coaches and athletes. But I had to, be willing to ask them the questions to kind of take the risk of them, blowing me off. And that happened a couple of times. But, so having those conversations with people, then about that same time, 18, 19 years old, is when information started to become a little bit more prevalent, a little easier to find. I was buying more books, stuff like Super Training Science and Practice of Strength Training, Transfer of Training. So reading more books, but still always talking to coaches, going to seminars. And at this point in my life, I'll listen to some podcasts here and there. I'll read articles that someone that I respect recommends to me. But more than anything else, I've been able to curate a network of experts around people who are living this every day as speed coaches, sport performance coaches, weightlifting coaches, physical therapists, and just have discussions with them. Anyone who's like gone to seminars and conferences and stuff know that like the presentations are fine, but you learn the most about training at the bar after, just like in a private conversation kind of stuff. So I get to have a lot of that with, people like Dr. Mike Israetel, James Hoffman, Max Ada, Les Spellman, people who are, leaders in their field, and bounce ideas off of them. And I think as you understand the principles that make training successful, it's so much easier for me now to look at something quickly and know that's not worth listening to at all. Or let's dive into this a little bit deeper. That's a little bit interesting. So it takes a lot for me to be like, all right, I'm going to read this guy's article. I'm going to buy his book and read his book. There's a pretty high barrier. While the barrier of entry to talk about fitness and lifting and stuff in the world of YouTube and Instagram is very, very low. The barrier for me to read, to give a shit about what you have written or said is very, very high. So they have to prove themselves quite well before they come across these big.
Get any headspace. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Chad, man, this has been great. I really appreciate it. And I'm certainly going to, link to the Juggernaut platform, because like I said, it's such a tremendous resource. But where else, if people want to follow you, where would you recommend they start?
Probably, they're just looking to learn. Juggernaut Training Systems YouTube, over 1,400 videos. I
over 1,400 videos.
I defy you to watch them all because it's such an overwhelming thing. If you Google Juggernaut YouTube book, last year we hit 250,000 subscribers, and I looked at that and was like, hey, this is a nice time for me to do this. I curated about 200 of our best videos of 45 hours worth of content by topic into a little bit more of like a curriculum by topic, because it's tough. And that's a tough thing about learning on the internet, is you can jump in at any point. You don't have to take the 101 before you get to the 201. You just first watch my most advanced, granular video and be like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? But other videos that explain the basics of it. So Google Juggernaut YouTube book. It's a free download. It curates that information. So check that out, jtsstrength.com, and then follow at Chad Wesley Smith and at Juggernaut Training and at Juggernaut Coaching for all our Instagram stuff.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, I think I got through like 2 of my 10 questions, but it's been like so incredibly informative. So thank you. We'll have to have you back at some point in the future. But awesome, man. Chad, thank you.
My pleasure, Ken.